Hi, I'm Ben. How you doing? Last video I made, I talked about designing repeating patterns, and as part of that I noticed that there's really kind of two big patterns that you could do with lighter covers that I make, which use 42 beads for 2 rows. And all the lighters I'd made up to this point had only been using one of them, the 7 repeating patterns of 6. But the math says I could do 3 repeating patterns of 14. So I said, I got to try that. And I did. And I got 5 lighters here I wanted to show you. So let's have a look. So here's all 5 that I made. And I included one of my older ones with the 6x7 pattern for comparison. And you can see these guys are radically different. You could never do anything like this with such a tight requirement with only 6 beads. It really opens it up. Let's take a look at each of these ones in particular by itself. So here's the first lighter I did, and I don't take small bites or dip my toe in the pool. I just jump in, and I sure did on this one. Too much so, in fact. My original design did not include these little white squares. That happened because I messed up in my thinking on this, and I made some bad assumptions, and I ended up like, well, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So I worked around it, and you know what? I actually like it more this way. What I shot for, though, was, you can see there's this central line running here, and then these guys run off. And each one of these I would call a pattern, and there's 3 of them. One thing that surprised me is how long these patterns are when you run diagonal. It's starting here. That thing runs all the way over and halfway to the other side before it stops. It's huge, right? And it's so wide. Now, it's kind of weird because I did this interleaving thing. It looks even wider, It just turned out pretty cool. The other thing I tried on this, my first one, I said, well, let me just try something simple after I went crazy here. Let me try something simple up top, and I did that. I will point out one other thing here. If you look, I've got a bead of the wrong color in there. And you know what? I noticed that when I started filming this. Am I going to change that? No. Your mistakes are just as important as your successes. The other thing that kind of struck me while I was making this and kind of finishing up with these white things is I said, look, there's these big ones and these little ones. That's a whole one, right? That makes up a whole pattern. This big triangle and this smaller triangle. And I was like, wait a second. The smaller triangle is exactly what I would be kind of the size if I was doing my 6x7, and that bigger one. So that's 6 beads. If you look, it's 1, 2, 3, right? And this one is actually 8 beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for the border, And I was like, 8 and 6, that's 14. So that had to percolate for a bit, and I didn't want to get into that, but I started thinking about, hey, you could do something else that would add up to 14. Okay, and then on the bottom, you can see I did a regular 7x6 pattern. This little arrow, purple arrows, they repeat. There's 7 of them. So it's a smaller, and I wanted to see what effect that had with the other one. Not too bad. Works great on this little border. It fits right in. Doesn't clash with it anyway. But also the way I did that design with a really hard line right here is adding for a departure. I could do whatever I want above and below anyway. So that's a very hard border, saying that there's no relationship between the middle and the other two. 3 different stories. Lighter number 2. And this is much simpler in design. I think it's pretty cool too. I went for a fading green going with the line, right? So there's dark, and there's six colors of green, and then it repeats. And there's 3 of these bands running up with the white in between. Now, one thing I did kind of interesting here, if you see the white, it just fades right out into the border, so it brings it all together. Real different from this other guy where I've got a very sharp delineation between the edges in the middle of the piece. This one says the edges run all the way through it. It's all one piece, and in a way it looks like maybe some ropes wrapping around the thing, and this is actually behind the rest of the white. One thing you'll also notice is that I use 6 colors, and what happens is if you look at like this dark green right here, if you follow that line up, it doesn't start over with dark green on the next band, it's the next color of green in the sequence. And that's because I used 6. Now remember, this is 14, so if you want to get that fade where the green line would trace all the way through, you need to have 7 colors in your fade. It needs to repeat every 7, not every 6, and you'll get that. You know, I wasn't really thinking about that when I did this. I just said, oh, I got 6 colors of green, let's try and fade it like this. And it didn't work out, but at the end of the day I look at it and go, yeah, this is still pretty sharp looking. I mean, it has its own effect, you know. In fact, that it's broken up says it's 3 different things rather than one continuous thing. So it's not real, it didn't really meet the background criteria. With the background you would expect everything to be seamless, and it didn't, so kind of neat in its own right. The third lighter. Wow, check out those colors, right? Fading from a dark red to a sunset yellow through the oranges. Neat. And instead of fading along the line, it fades the other direction, perpendicular. And it just turned out super. I love this color fade. I love warm colors when they do this. Real kind of a tequila sunrise type of look. The border, again, it's a hard border, but I did a 2 bead fade. In the previous example, I did a 1 bead fade. Every row is a different color of bead until it gets all the way down to dark brown there. In this one, I actually did 2 beads of dark, 2 beads of red, you know, all the way. So every column has every color. The other thing is I put these little white guys here, and again, they're not like where it looks like I stopped and it's like going underneath. They are broken up with each other, so it's not running in a perfect line. They don't follow the diagonals on this way, and that's okay. It'd look good either way. You wouldn't even necessarily have to have them, but I wanted to have something extra besides just the fade itself. Can't seem to, it's too simple for me. I like it more complicated. I had this big border at the bottom, which meant I wanted to have a little border at the top. I wanted to have as much room as I could for my middle piece. And again, it's freestyle, so once I got done with the bottom border, I'm like, ooh, I got no room up here, so I just did this very minor, simple thing. That's how it works out. Next piece, well, I had done all of these angular motion type things, you know, and I hadn't tried to do any straight pieces, and so I thought I would try one. You know, with the beads and the way that I do them, there's no backing. It's just the beads wrapping around the lighter, right? There's nothing else. And so that makes it can flex quite a bit. So you can twist this all over the place, you know. And these lines here are supposed to be vertical. So if you want them to be vertical, you got to line it up. And that's the downside to doing stuff where you've got vertical lines that are supposed to look vertical is the medium itself does not lend itself well to vertical lines. It really says, hey, you need to have angles. I got this part done up here, and I wanted to have virtually no border at the top and then some kind of big thing at the bottom. And that's what I ended up doing. You can see, and then these colors, they're complementary colors, purple and gold. Those are my high school colors. Not like I was into team sports or spirit or anything. But anyhow, I did a yellows fading to brown through, you know, kind of I skipped orange, right? So just yellow straight to brown. Turns out real nice. And the purple, all I did was go for light in the middle and dark up against the border. Turned out pretty good, but holy mackerel, these things are huge. And I didn't even make them symmetrical in height, right? There's 6, if you count like these purple beads, there's 6 of them and only 3 vertically. If I wanted to have this like a perfect hexagon, I would have gone 6, but oh my gosh, that's mammothly tall, and I wouldn't get as many in. So I went with that instead. Yeah, Not proud of this piece. Well, I am. It was fun going there, but I'm just not much on doing these more simple patterns. I like to get a little more complicated than this. Alright, the final lighter that I did, remember back in the original one that I did, I was talking about these little white things here. There was a big one and a small one, and they added up to 14. Well, I'm going to do that. And if you look, here we have it. It's a little bit wider. And so these stripes, they look really more reminiscent of the older one, right? 7x6s, but I can tell you there's only 6 of these stripes, and 2 make up a pattern. Now, I broke with it. These guys, these repeating patterns, the colors and everything are the same. In this one, the colors are different in each one, although the shape is the same. So it's a bit of a departure. And what I did was I simply did the rainbow, you know, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple, you know, all 6 colors, 3 primaries and 3 secondaries. The primaries I did where I had 3 colors in the fade, and the secondary is only 2, right? So there's 2 purples, 3 blues, 2 greens, 3 yellows, and so on. And then I butted it up with these wedges here. If you look, it's not a perfect white. It doesn't show too good on the camera, but it is a slight off-white, and it looked just fine. It actually kind of fit in better for this particular piece. I don't know. They're both nice. You can use either one, or it's just a choice. And then finally, I bordered it with a symmetrical rainbow on each side, where 1 bead for each color. So only 1 bead of purple, blue, green, yellow. So it fades really fast, a lot faster than say this fade here, where I did a full 2 beads. You know, so every column has 1 of each color. In this one, every column has 1 of every other color, right? So there's a purple here, and then the next one down, it jumps to a green, while the blue's over there. So it fades really fast. The other thing that was interesting about this is I actually made the 2 ends first. I said I want to have it perfectly symmetrical on the ends. The same thing on the ends. And it was going to be the exact same pattern all the way through the middle. Once you get past this point here, it's exactly the same colors every single time. So I made the 2 ends, and then I added beads in the middle until it was the right length. So very different from the way I would normally make beads, where I would do the middle piece and then try and fit in some kind of border around the edges, and the work shows. This one I purposely said I want the borders exactly the same, because the middle, it's the same thing over and over. I could have changed it up, and it gives me something to think about, but it was a different way of constructing it. So there's all 5 back again. So many different possibilities. Barely scratched the surface. You know, 3x14, it's more open. You've got more you can do in your pattern than you can in these little 7x6s. It's so tight, you don't really have much room to do crazy stuff. These things, you can just go plumb crazy, do all kinds of stuff, a lot more open room. The only thing I can say is you got to be careful, because that pattern, you're not going to even hardly see the whole thing on one. It's just so wide, you don't get that sense of repetition on this, like this big guy right here. You kind of see it, but it's not as obvious as, say, something in this, where you can see it's the same thing over and over. In fact, you can almost see one totally all on one side, even though it wraps as far as it does. On these guys, wow, there's a lot of, your mind's got to do a lot of fill in the blank. But so I think it's not so good, this one. But these other guys, they're all pretty dang good. So there it is. 5 lighters, all very different from each other, using a 14x3 pattern. If you have any questions or anything else you'd want to see me do or anything like that, I'm totally open to requests. There's so few people watching this channel that everyone's like a precious jewel. I love y'all, and I'll do whatever I can to help you release the inner beater or whatever. Anyway, I want you to have as much fun as I do. You have a good one. Thanks for watching.